Hey everybody, welcome. I'm back. I can't say welcome back because I haven't been exactly here for the past week. But hey, we're here. TYT Nation back on the air for at least the Friday show. We're still getting things set up, so things might look a little strange. Might not work correctly, but we're gonna work on things. So, if anybody notices anything that's a little off, let me know. So I can actually fix it. That includes sound, video, weird, anything. Just let me know. Okay. Anyway, so like I said, we've got a Good Friday show. I do want to recap some of the things that happened this week a little bit. Kaepernick protests, the healthcare, the GOP tax plan. That's a lot of fun, so we're going to talk about that. Before I get into it, though, I do want to thank some patrons right now, so let's get to that. I, of course, want to thank Dan Peachy, Scott Nimitz, Pam, Philip Morrison, Mark Bass, Scott Hunter, Orleni Silverio, Camille Wren. We've got more names that I want to shout as well. Linda Gertis, Elizabeth Uval, Colin Barber, Jacob Torrey. Let's go up here and get some other names as well. Ramona Lewis, Julio, Ivy Coliosho, Justin Murphy, and Jeff Smith. So thank you to all those names that I just said. As well as to everybody else who supports us on Patreon, patreon.com/TYTNation. Again, I know we haven't been here for the past week because we've been moving. So this has been nonstop, busy, trying to get things all moved and set up and cleaned up and all that stuff. So unpacked. I still got boxes everywhere. So it's just been very, very busy, but it is good to be back. To talk about some news, some politics. So, like I said, today I am going to talk about the tax plan, what the reality is, and what they're actually saying about it. That's Trump's advisors, the people that are really pushing it, Gary Cohn, Steven Mnuchin. We're going to break down their lies and bullshit. Speaking of bullshit, of course, we'll talk about how out of touch Gary Cohn is. Because he actually believes that $1,000 can buy you a new car and remodel your kitchen. That's amazing, and it just shows how out of touch that they are. Then we're going to talk about the truth about income inequality, how bad it's really gotten. Then Lindsey Graham basically admitting what we all already kind of figured out on healthcare, and then the California primary, why that's a disaster, their decision to move it, and of course, we'll talk a little bit about some something related to the Take a Knee protests of the national anthem with Colin Kaepernick. So we've got those stories, a lot of stuff to get through, a lot of news. So let's start out with tax reform. Tax reform. I always have to make sure to do that, but I will forget. All right. All right. Now, the Republican Party recently revealed their outline for so-called tax reform. Okay. Now, the outline is very vague. There's not a lot of detail in it, but the main takeaway is, when reading their outline, is that they really want to cut taxes on the very rich and corporations. Now, some of the tax cuts in there also, to throw a little bit of a bone towards the middle class, cuts it a little bit for them. Can't really cut taxes too much for the poor because they already don't pay a lot of taxes. So while we don't have all the details yet, and look, we don't have the details because they haven't figured out how to balance the numbers, we do have some of what they're planning to do in this outline. So I'm going to go into detail about that. And hey, unsurprisingly, it does not match up with their rhetoric about what this plan actually does. Now, for example, earlier this week, Gary Cohn said that the rich are not getting a tax cut under this plan. In fact, you know what? I don't have the video ready, so I'm going to have to cue up the video here real quick here. But once we do that, I want to show you this video.
We expanded Medicaid.
That is not the video. Fail, sad. This is what happens when you take a week off. Hold. It's okay.
Can you guarantee that President Trump won't get a tax cut under this plan?
George, when we've looked at the tax plan and we look what it does for Americans, we are very confident that Americans are getting a great deal here. We have also said that wealthy Americans are not getting a tax cut. We have designed a tax plan that is stimulus for the economy, where we are giving tax cuts to middle and lower income Americans. We want everyday hardworking Americans to have more money in their paycheck. Your audience watching TV now, getting ready to go off to work, we want to find a way to put more money back in their paycheck.
Will the wealthy get a tax cut or not?
The wealthy are not getting a tax cut under our plan.
That's not the evidence that's out there so far, but of course there are a lot of details yet to come. As you have pointed out, Congress has to deal with it. We'll see what happens in the next several months.
No. George, you had it right there. You had it right the first time. The wealthy are getting a tax cut, a gigantic tax cut, a huge one. I know what he's doing, right? Oh, no. We got to be fair to a Republican guy because... Well, none of the details are out. So, and maybe they'll close loopholes for the rich. Well, they always say they're going to close loopholes for the rich, but they never do. They never do. So, and look, in the rare occasion that they actually do close a loophole, they just create another one. So, look, that's the thing. The whole claim that we're not cutting taxes from the rich, when you're obviously cutting taxes for the rich, absolute bullshit, right? Any plan that includes reduction in the tax rates is a tax cut. And that's exactly what this does. Now, look, conservatives will love to point out how wealthy people, well, they pay out most of the taxes, right? And that's true. According to the Treasury Department data, the top 10% of income earners in 2016 paid 80% of individual income taxes. The top 20% paid 94.8% of all the taxes. And the top 0.1% paid 24.5% of all the taxes. So, look, it makes sense that they pay all the taxes because they've got all the money. Okay? Now, that, of course, will lead you to a different conversation, a conversation that probably we'll have in another video or something. But basically, the whole point is when you cut income tax rates, it usually results in a lot of money for the rich. Usually. It depends on what taxes you cut, and in this case, a lot of the taxes that are cut are taxes that the rich will pay. For example, the Trump tax plan would drop the top bracket from 39.6% to 35%, and will allow the possibility of a 25% top rate threat through a pass-through entity. It presumably would also eliminate a 3.8% Obamacare tax on investment income that only hits upper income taxpayers. Now, look, I don't know what that looks like to you, but to me, that looks like a big tax cut for the rich. Now, not only that, but the Trump tax plan would also eliminate the alternative minimum tax, paid for mostly by the wealthy. Now, finally, the tax plan also calls for eliminating the estate tax. Now, currently, the estate tax is only estimated to affect about 5,500 estates out of the nearly 3 million estates, because as much of $11 million can be shielded from federal taxation. But of course, the rich will not benefit at all from this tax cut. That's crazy. No. What that is what Gary Cohn was saying is a complete and utter fabrication. The entire point of this tax reform bill is to cut taxes for the rich and corporations. And they sent out Gary Cohn to lie to your face. Now, finally, we had a White House official who came out later and said Quote, "We strongly believe that the final tax bill will not cut taxes for the wealthy as a class. But there is no way to solve for every single individual in the country." Oh, we believe it won't cut taxes for the rich. I mean, that's not our goal. But if it does cut taxes for the wealthy, well, golly gee, I guess we couldn't really help it. We might as well just do it anyway. No, that is a complete load of horseshit. Now, speaking of horseshit, let's go to Steven Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary. Now, he claims that these tax cuts will magically give us incredible growth. In an interview on Fox News, he claimed that not only would there be $2 trillion worth of growth, but it will also cut deficits by $1 trillion. Now, based on what? Like, where's his numbers? Where's his research? Is there any data or facts backing him up? Absolutely not. He says that this is more trickle-down economics. This is a result of if you cut taxes, you're going to get magical economic growth. It doesn't work, though. And by the way, he's also saying, well, we're not cutting taxes on the rich. Well, then who are you cutting taxes on? Certainly not so much the middle class. Yes, they get a small tax cut. I'll go over that in another video. But the majority of the tax cuts go to the very wealthy. And we've already tried that, and guess what? That does not create economic growth. In fact, we've cut taxes for the rich for over 30 years, and still, where's the economic growth? Oh, but by the way, they're totally not cutting taxes for the rich. So says Gary Cohn. And even if they did, it will create growth and cut deficits. And also, a magic unicorn will go and shit out gold bricks for everybody. Hey, man, sign me up. Who doesn't need a gold-shitting unicorn? Again, this is nonsensical. It's the same sort of bullshit voodoo economics that even Republicans used to be like, oh, come on, that's crap. Now they've all embraced it. And they all are like, yes, tax cuts, more tax cuts for my donors, for the rich. Yes, give me more tax cuts. We got to pass more tax cuts. Look, the result of this, and we already have case studies, we could already see the overall effect on the economy of the Bush tax cuts, which again created gigantic deficits. I mean, look, according to the Nonpartisan Committee for the Responsible Federal Budget. By the way, this is a Pete Peterson conservative foundation, right? Even they're like, yeah, no, you cut taxes on the rich, you're going to lose $2.2 trillion over the next 10 years in government revenue. If you actually do care about a balanced budget, which they obviously do not, then you won't cut taxes on the rich. And they're all making this assumption like, no, you don't understand. They're going to invest. They're going to do all this stuff. And it's going to create massive economic growth. But we have not seen that. That is a complete lie. And not only that, but they also added the possible interest on the debt. $2.2 trillion. If that's not bad enough, if that's not enough of a budget buster for some of these so-called fiscal conservatives, that additional interest on the debt, according to this group, would increase by $2.7 trillion. Yeah, but Jeff, economic growth, you don't understand. Again, we have we have examples of this. We've done this already. It doesn't work. But yet, they claim that it pays for itself. But if you ask any serious economist, they'll tell you that the math just does not work. Here's the reality on this, okay? Now, the Congressional Budget Office under Douglas Holtz Eakin, now this guy is a Republican, right? In 2005, estimated that a 10% reduction in federal income tax rates would have macroeconomic feedback, so that's the whole economy, of between 15 and 30%. In other words, he says that a $1 trillion tax cut might yield $150 billion to $300 billion in additional revenue. That still means a reduction in revenue of as much as $700 billion. Holtz-Eakin also wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post earlier this year talking about this subject, saying that proposing trillions of dollars in tax cuts and then casually asserting that such a plan would pay for itself with growth is detached from empirical reality. Not only that, but you have the biggest patron saint of tax cuts, Ronald fucking Reagan, who predicted that revenues would fall, and they did, as a result of his 1981 tax cut. In fact, later on, that tax cut, he's like, yeah, I'm going to have to raise taxes several times in order to make up for this gigantic budget shortfall. Now, what's important about this, and why I bring up Reagan, is that, well, you also have Bruce Bartlett, right? Bruce Bartlett helped craft that 1981 tax cut as a congressional aide. He now says that's a complete mistake. Responding in the Washington Post to Mnuchin's claim, he said that, quote, in reality, there's no evidence that a tax cut now would spur growth. Furthermore, he argues that tax increases on the wealthy actually do not harm growth. It actually helps growth in many cases. He said the flip side of tax cut mythology is the notion that tax increases are an economic disaster. And of course, unfortunately, we have politicians on both sides, Democrats and Republicans, that are like, no, we must lower taxes on corporations, and then we're going to get economic growth. Well, that's a fallacy. And we have a lot of these corporate Democrats that have strayed away from Keynesian economics are now believing in and buying into this trickle-down bullshit. Now, he says, the reason in theory every Republican in Congress voted against the tax increase proposed by Bill Clinton in 93, yet the 90s was the most prosperous decade in recent memory. At 37.3%, aggregate real GDP growth in the 90s exceeded that of the 1980s, which of course, a lot of conservatives are like, no, we had massive economic growth in the 1980s because of Ronald Reagan and his tax cuts. Well, we had even more growth in the 1990s, and we had tax increases under Bill Clinton. That's interesting. They never bring that up. Now, in the next paragraph, he actually also rails against the Bush tax cuts. He said, quote, despite huge tax cuts almost annually during the George W. Bush administration that cost the Treasury trillions in revenue, according to the CBO, growth collapsed in the first decade of the 2000s. Real GDP rose just 19.5%, well below its 90s rate. So again, we have empirical evidence that this does not work. And they know this. Look, the real reason they're doing tax cuts is because they want their money. This is about greed. Both the wealthy politicians and their donors, they just want more money. Okay? And of course, other than getting paid, the politicians also want to shrink government. Now, why is that? Well, look, when their plan leads to massive debts, right? When they cut taxes and suddenly, oh, we can't afford any of these things. Well, they go on to claim that it's not the tax cuts that did it, that bankrupted the government. No, it's the social programs. It's food stamps, things like Social Security and Medicare that are bankrupting the country. So they go out there, they talk about how we need to reform Social Security. We need to reform Medicare so we can reduce this gigantic debt burden that we've placed on the country, on the young people. Oh, we can't leave our young people with so much debt. Can't do that. Oh, we're going to have to privatize it. And when they privatize it, especially when it comes to Social Security, and they already have plans out there to do so, well, who does that leave your retirement, your Social Security in the hands of? Stephen Mnuchin's banker friends. Gary Cohn's banker friends at Goldman Sachs, who can then take your retirement and make a fortune off gambling in the Wall Street casino. This is what tax reform is actually all about. So don't be fooled by bullshit promises of economic growth, because I can assure you that they cannot, or that they do not and have not ever existed. Okay. So let me go to the next tax story. Lots of tax-related stuff today. And of course, it's another video with Gary Cohn. So you have to be patient with me as I don't have the video queued up. All right. Now, Gary Cohn is Donald Trump's chief economic advisor. He's also a millionaire, seems to be very, very out of touch with the American people. And as evidenced, this video, let me try that again. As evidenced of the video as I'm about to show you, Now, recently he was touting President Trump's tax plan, which would, of course, cut taxes on the richest Americans by billions of dollars and maybe help the middle class just a little bit. Now, recently Cohn appeared at a White House press briefing and spoke to what middle class Americans would actually have to look forward to under this new tax plan. That is apparently not a tax cut for the rich. Let's watch.
Can you guarantee that President Trump...
The American people are concerned about is their financial position. I think what they're concerned about is when they go to work every week and they get their paycheck at the end of the week, how much do they get to keep? How much goes in their pocket versus how much goes to the government? How much do they get to spend versus how much do they send to the government? If we allow a family to keep another $1,000 of their income, what does that mean? They can renovate their kitchen. They can buy a new. They can buy a new car. They can take a family vacation. They can increase their lifestyle. That's what our tax plan is to do. Our tax plan is aimed to return more income back to hardworking Americans. That's what we're trying to do here.
Okay. So, again, that's actually not what the tax plan is about. The tax plan is about lowering corporate taxes and lowering taxes for the rich. That's what it's about. You just have to look at the plan or the outline of the plan, and you can see very plainly what it's actually about. Now, as far as his statements about, well, if we let the average American family have an extra $1,000, well, you can do so much with that extra $1,000. Like what? Buy a car? Ain't nobody buying a car with $1,000. I mean, sure, saving an extra grand a year might actually help with that, but odds are some of the taxes might actually go up in other ways. For example, payroll taxes, local taxes. For example, if a state is not getting money from the federal government, tax money sent to it from the federal government, well then those government services will either disappear or the cost will be passed on to you. So you'll end up paying more of your state and local taxes, or you just won't have those services. So in the end, you always end up paying anyway. But again, maybe payroll taxes more directly, those might go up to help cover the shortfall the government will have from these giant tax cuts. So are you going to really be saving all that much money? Probably not. And in the end, it turns out a way just to shift money from you to the very, very rich. And that's the point of this whole thing. Now, not only that, but he said, well, if you get an extra $1,000, well, we already come up with that figure. Well, this is an administration figure they came up with. And look, he said middle class, right? If you're a middle class family, well, just because you're a middle class family doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to end up getting that entire $1,000. For example, this is based on the administration's assumptions. So they don't even know because the plan is so vague and not fleshed out, right? But it says that a typical family that has 2 children and earns $100,000 per year, that is not a typical family for one. You can expect an annual tax savings of approximately $1,000. Again, that is not your typical American family. In fact, the median average wage for an American family is half that, about $53,000 a year. Well, how much are those families going to save? They didn't even go by the median. They just picked a number out of a hat. Oh, $100,000. That sounds really good, right? You're going to save $1,000. My guess is if you're about $50,000, if you're at the median, you're going to be less impressed by your tax savings. Okay. Now, what about the poor? Well, they don't even talk about the poor. But you got to compare that savings with the wealthiest Americans and corporations. And when you do, you realize that this tax plan is massively slanted towards them and not towards the middle class. It's not even close. Again, if a family is making $100,000 and they save about $1,000, well, you can compare that to Trump, who makes millions of dollars still as president on top of his presidential salary. And you look at his savings, well, he's going to save $135 million a year under this plan. Now, somebody's winning under this plan. There's winning going on. It's just not you that's doing it. Okay. Now, again, I want to go back to Cohn's ridiculous numbers. If he thinks that $1,000 is going to help you either A, buy a car, which, no, that's not necessarily true, or help you remodel your kitchen, well, let me tell you what the average cost to remodel a kitchen is in America. it cost about $21,800 just to remodel a kitchen. Did you know that 40% of the workforce, that's 40% of Americans that are working, they don't even make $21,800 a year. They don't make that. That's just to remodel a kitchen. And yet, again, Trump's savings per year alone could remodel hundreds of Americans' kitchens, maybe even thousands of Americans' kitchens. That's a lot of money. This is outrageous, and it actually shows you just how out of touch people like Gary Cohn actually are. Because, again, this guy is a multimillionaire. He doesn't understand the plight of regular people. See, this is the swamp. See, and not only is this the swamp, but Cohn is one of the swamp monsters. Goldman Sachs guy, through and through, okay? And ironically, this is the kind of person that Donald Trump railed against, the global financial elite. And yet these are the same people that are going to end up winning alongside with Trump with his tax plan. Now you know. Okay. Okay. Let's move on here to income inequality. Now, economic inequality continues to be the most pressing, yet least talked about issue of the day. Now, except for the rare people like Bernie Sanders and a lot of different progressives, there doesn't seem to be a lot of people talking about the effects and impacts of income inequality and actually how much worse it's been getting. Now, there's actually a new report out from the Federal Reserve, which actually does highlight who has the majority of wealth in America, and this is absolutely staggering. First, we've got some charts here, and these are some scary charts. Now, first, this graph, I'm gonna put it up here, and that is this one. Now, this is, again, you can't really tell a lot about this, except for look at the concentration of wealth. Okay. It just shows how much wealth is being concentrated by the percentile. Now, I want to go to the next chart here, which is along the same lines, and it shows you what percent of wealth is owned by each wealth decile. So, as you can see, the bottom 10% owns about negative 0.5% of the wealth in this country. So they actually owe. So these are people that are actually in debt to other people. So that's 10%. And then, of course, it goes up. The sixth decile, 1.9%. Very, very low numbers. And until you get to the top 10%, which owns 77.1% of wealth in this country. 70% of wealth in just the top 10%. That's insane. That is not a sustainable number. Okay, so there's one more disastrous chart here. Now, this shows you how much wealth is owned by the top 1% and actually how much it's changed over the years since at least the 1980s. So let's go to that last chart here. And Jesus. So in 1989, the top 1% owned about 29.9% of the wealth in this survey. Okay, in 2016, it's now up to 38.5%. So if you look at that, it was fairly low in the 1990s. Then, 1995, it shot up, went down in the 2000s, and then 2005 started going up. 2007, 2008. Look at that. 2010. This is during the presidency of Barack Obama. Bam! shot right up. It's been going out ever since. So this is between different presidencies, both Republicans and Democrats, and it has not stopped rising. Again, very interesting that some of the biggest period of growth for income inequality, right, for the amount of wealthy people getting even richer, was during the presidency of Barack Obama. Now, wait a minute. I thought that a lot of Democrats cared about that. Well, a lot of Democratic voters do. In fact, most of them do. But unfortunately, we have establishment corporate politicians that actually don't care about that. Okay. Now, those people, they'll give lip service to income inequality, but then they'll continue to do neoliberal policies like bad trade deals, for example, TPP, tax cuts for the rich, special incentives for businesses, and all that different stuff. That actually goes to exacerbate the high levels of income inequality. Now, of course, how do we fix this? Well, look, for one, and I keep saying this, we're never going to get a handle on this unless we actually start taxing the rich and investing in the poor and the middle class. Now, you can do that by raising the minimum wage to a living wage, guaranteeing health care and education to everybody. Imagine no more debt graduating from college. Because when you graduate college with all this debt, you're starting out as a net negative. You're $30,000, $40,000, sometimes $100,000 in the hole. And you got to dig out from, you got to dig yourself out of that hole. And sometimes it takes decades just to break even. That, of course, feeds into massive income inequality. So we've got to, do something about that. Healthcare, if you get sick, you get cancer, you're set way back. And, of course, that impacts economic inequality as well. So there are a lot of problems with those two issues as well. And making, college tuition free and actually being able to allow everybody to get health care through a Medicare for all system, that will actually really help to close that divide. And again, raising the wage also will help to close that divide. Not only that, but just making sure that, there are people that can create businesses and have opportunity. That's what we could do. And it's not like we're broke. We already have the money enough that we could do that. But instead what we're doing is that we're spending it on wealthy people, giving them giant tax cuts and more incentives and investing into people who already have all the money. Now, look, again, you've seen the numbers on income inequality. They have a lot of the wealth and I don't necessarily think that they're hoarding the wealth just to be complete assholes. Some of them, absolutely. But I think that there's a lot of people who are just completely oblivious to what's going on. And the reason that they, just continue to hoard the money is because they don't have anything to spend it on. They can't put it back into that economy. That's why it needs to be taxed. And that's why you do have some very, very wealthy people saying, yes, please tax me. That money is sitting around. It could actually be doing something useful in the economy. The real economy, not the Wall Street casino, okay, which has almost nothing to do with actual Main Street. That money could be taxed and actually be put to better use, investing in America. And that's really the only way that we can start to really tear down this massive or close this massive divide. And in case you think that this is not a real problem, well, there are a lot of economists out there that point out the fact that this massive amount of income inequality is just bad for the economy at large. Now, for one, the banks, right? Now, as the wealthy earn more and actually need to find a place to put their excess money, financial institutions will take more aggressive risks to boost return for their investors, to try to entice people to come in and invest their money. Well, what's wrong with that, you ask? Well, it turns out that this increased risky behavior makes it easier for another financial crash to happen, just like the one in 2008. That's bad for the economy, right? Now, there's another reason that wealth concentration at the very top is an important issue, why it's bad. Now, a lot of households they have fixed expenses, right? Now, if you have fixed expenses and your paycheck never grows, but your bills continue to, right? And they always continue to get bigger and bigger. And if your income is stagnant, well, then in order to make up the difference, you're going to have to start borrowing money. You're going to have to take out credit cards and stuff like that. Now, that is not a sustainable solution, okay? Because at some point, debt repayments will exceed the ability of people to repay, causing that line of credit to dry up. As a result, a lot of these people might end up losing their homes and their abilities to pay for their basic necessities, whose prices continue to rise. Now, that of course hurts the economy, because then you've got less people spending. When you have less people spending, you have less people, that are needed to do those jobs. At the grocery store, for example, less people are buying groceries at the grocery store. You're not going to need as many people working at the grocery store. You're going to lead to more layoffs. Now, more layoffs, of course, adds to more unemployment. That adds more people to the welfare rolls. That puts a strain on an already underfunded safety net system, who then, of course, had to tighten eligibility even further, which puts more people into a situation where they just can't afford to live. So it's just got this downward snowball effect. And not only that, but just think of the people, right? Don't even think about the money. Think of the people that are stuck in this situation and their health. There's a lot of evidence out there that shows that inequality is associated with different health problems, such as obesity, which I know seems like a oxymoron. Why are these people getting fat if they're poor? Well, it turns out that they have poor diets. I mean, when you can get a giant, Coke for $1 versus $1.49 for a small thing of water, well, what are people going to choose, right? And not only that, but you've got snack foods that are heavily subsidized because of the corn that's in them. Because corn is heavily subsidized by the government for high fructose corn syrup and, all these different things, these corn related products. Well, this gets heavily subsidized, but vegetables do not. Vegetables are far more expensive than a bag of potato chips or a bag of corn chips or something sweet with, high fructose corn syrup. So they're going to gravitate towards foods that are very, very unhealthy, that are filled with empty calories, but they're cheaper. That's how people get fat even when they're poor. So, and that of course creates all sorts of health issues later on down the road. Not only that, but they have infant mortality and also higher rates of, higher rates of infant mortality and lower life expectancies, as well as social problems such as crime, criminal activity, and addiction. And we've seen this. And not only that, but the other impact of this is that it just makes it easier for the very rich to affect political outcomes, because they've got all this money, they're going to throw it towards more conservative or more candidates that will actually help them keep more of that money. Which makes no sense to me, because at some point you realize I've got more money than I actually need or that I can actually use. So why do I need more? Why am I going to spend more money to affect the outcome of these political races? Which of course impacts democracy. So now, of course, none of that might matter if you're an asshole who's only looking after himself. I understand that. But again, the effect on the economy at large is significant. And that's actually why we should do something to redistribute some of that wealth from the top towards everybody else. And I know that's a dirty word. Heads just exploded. Oh my God, he's talking about redistribution of wealth. What a socialist. Trust me. Rich people, super, super rich, the top 0.1%, they're not going to miss that money too badly. When you already have billions of dollars and everything you could ever want in the world, a few million just to make sure that society that helped you get rich doesn't implode is a small price to pay. Just saying. Okay. So, all right. Let's move on here Let's go to Lindsey Graham. Now, earlier this week, the last Republican plan to repeal Obamacare died as they couldn't secure enough Republican votes to take away health care from millions of Americans. Wonderful. Now, since it is now dead, those who were involved in it are saying, "What? No, who, me? No. I didn't want to take your health care. In fact, I had no idea that the bill would actually do that. I had no idea what was actually in the bill. I had no idea what I was doing." Really? Yes, really. Turns out the lead author of the measure, known as Graham Cassidy, this would be Lindsey Graham, the Graham in Graham Cassidy, claims that he had no idea, no clue what he was doing when pushing for Graham Cassidy. This is amazing. Now, this is according to Ryan Grimm for The Intercept. He was writing for The Intercept. He said, Graham said he was not alone in his lack of understanding healthcare. This is Trump all over again. Nobody knew healthcare would be so complicated. I couldn't believe it. He said, nobody in our conference believes Obamacare works. It must be replaced. But until now, we didn't know how to do it. And then why are you trying to do it? If you had no plan, which is obvious that you didn't, and you didn't understand how it works, then why would you do it? It makes no sense. It makes no sense. Now look, first off, you're actually wrong on that. And it's demonstrable that you're wrong. Obamacare is actually working in its intended framework. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't have a ton of issues. I've talked about those on the show all the time. Now, I believe that these issues could be fixed by expanding Medicare to everyone to actually have a real universal system and to fix the problems with for-profit healthcare. But on Lindsey Graham, you're going to rail against this bill or this law for 7 years, and yet you have no idea what to replace it with. What an idiot. This guy's a monumental moron. All right. Now, a reporter pointed this out, and she actually asked him about it. And he said, quote, well, I've been doing it for about a month. Wait, so trying to plan out and to learn and figure out how to replace the ACA? You were on it for about a month. Wow. But he said, quote, I thought everyone else knew what the hell they were talking about, but apparently not. Graham clarified, adding that he had assumed, quote, these really smart people will figure it out. These really smart people will figure it out. Oh my God. Hey man, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. I thought there were smart people here to take care of that, because I'm obviously not one of them. No shit. Oh, it's ridiculous. And look, the guy, I thought he was supposed to be some sort of healthcare wonk, that he was actually supposed to know. But no, you didn't know what the bill was about or the impact it would have. And look, nobody knew what the impact would be because they tried to ram it through before the CBO could actually fucking score it. God, this is ridiculous. All this is basically doing is admitting that their entire plan for 7 years was to run around screaming, Obamacare bad, and then do nothing about it. And then suddenly the American people are, you know what? You got a point. We're going to give you a chance to do something. Oh, shit. I didn't think they'd actually vote for us. Yeah, well, that's what happened. And now, basically, you're caught with your bare ass hanging out. Ugh. And look, they never had a replacement, a real replacement, because the last few plans were absolutely abhorrent, cobbled together pieces of shit that they threw together last minute from all their grab bag of different conservative heritage, think tanks and foundations and bullshit. Like, I don't know, let's try that. We'll see if high risk pools work. No, we've already tried high risk pools. They don't work, and they're actually terrible. Oh well, we'll try to block grant to the states. No, that's also terrible and also doesn't work. I don't know, let's throw it in there anyway. They have no idea what they're doing. And look, the reason that they have no idea what they're doing is because, and why they didn't have a healthcare plan, is because Barack Obama and the Democrats essentially already stole their healthcare plan. It's called Obamacare. That's their healthcare plan. But anyway, now get this. While millions of Americans were worried about their existing healthcare coverage, right? apparently Lindsey Graham was actually off really enjoying himself when it comes to learning about other healthcare system. He said, quote, "I've enjoyed this more than anything. I've learned so much about healthcare in other states. Pennsylvania, Alaska, Ohio." He said, adding that he even learned about his own state, South Carolina, where, quote, "We have 11 predominantly African-American counties, that have unique healthcare needs, and one size doesn't fit all, even within your state. I also looked at the history of welfare reform, and I think we can replicate that here." Sure, because it worked out so well when it came to welfare. Even Bill Clinton called that a mistake. Wonderful. But anyway, look, what's funny about this, and Graham said it earlier, is that he wasn't the only one who was clueless about this very, very important piece of legislation. Turns out a lot of senators, as I said, had no idea what was in the bill. And when Graham realized that, he's like, well, I got to come up with something. I know, I'm going to meet up with Rick Santorum. He's going to meet up with Frothy, okay, to try and figure out healthcare. Oh, this is going to be great. Now, he said this idea came from a conversation at a barbershop. Oh, where all great ideas come from, a barbershop. Rick Santorum, I was getting my hair cut, and he says, you've got an opt-out bill. Opt out of Obamacare if you don't like it. Take the money and do state-controlled systems, except for single-payer. They banned that. Why don't you do what we did with welfare reform in '96, which is basically take the same amount of money and block grant it. Again, for one, that's a terrible idea. Block granting money to the states basically gives the state the power to allocate the money basically wherever it sees fit. Now, some people will be like, well, what's bad about that? Well, it's not bad if you're in a state like California that actually might use that money, or very, very likely to use that money for healthcare, because they're a progressive state. However, in places like Kansas, Louisiana, Alabama, or even South Carolina, well, the Republicans, they're in Republican-controlled states. They'll just take that money and be like, tax cuts for the rich. We're going to plug our budget hole, and healthcare. We don't care about that. Sad. So good luck if you need healthcare if you're living in those states. Odds are you're not going to get it. You're going to get dick. Now, with all this talk about Lindsey Graham actually learning things, well, what did he learn? He said, we now have an idea that I think Republicans understand and the average person can understand. Well, I think the average person understands something about the GOP and their healthcare plans. You know what they figured out? That they suck. And that the Republicans have no good ideas when it comes to healthcare. That's why all these repeal bills had such low approval ratings. While interestingly enough, there is a bill out there from the progressive side that has a lot of detail from someone you might have possibly heard of who ran for the Democratic nomination, which would expand a little program called Medicare, which happens to be incredibly popular. Maybe politicians should start looking into that. Just saying. Now, speaking of Democratic Party, let's move on. In what I believe to be a preemptive strike against the progressive candidates, California has officially moved their primary schedule to Super Tuesday. So this is in March. Now, The Hill reports that California Governor Jerry Brown on Wednesday had signed a measure moving the state's 2020 presidential primary back all the way to March, a move likely to give the nation's most populous state more sway in the nominating contest. Now, in my opinion, it would also give the Democratic establishment a huge boost. Any candidate that's backed by the establishment, they would get a boost over their lesser-known progressive rivals, which is, in my opinion, a disaster. Now, if you're not aware, California usually holds its primary in June, near the end. I believe it is the last contest. Now, you might be wondering why this entire thing is a problem. Well, for one, California has the most delegates. If you win California on Super Tuesday, well, you pretty much won the contest. There's no need for the rest of the primary. You're done. It's going to be near impossible to recover from a loss of California so early into the primary process. Now, another problem here is that it would make all the politicians running for the nomination have to immediately focus a lot of time and money into California very early on. And that is problematic as well, because California is not a cheap state to run up an election in. Turns out their ad buys are very, very expensive. And again, it's very, very large. Now, if you're an upstart candidate and you need millions and millions of dollars to run ads in California and you're just starting, well, how do you expect you're going to perform? Not very well. You're not going to be able to compete in California's massive, expensive media market. And that means you're not going to get out to the voters who don't know who you are and might actually support your agenda. Now, again, they can't do that because they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, and all of that just happens to benefit the establishment candidate who has all the money, who has all the resources, who may even have all the name recognition. And by the way, might also have all the superdelegates. I believe it's 71 for California. Already have all those locked up by the time March rolls around, instead of June, instead of running a several-month primary. This is a disaster. And make no mistake, this is a kill shot for progressive candidates. And Jerry Brown, in signing this, has actually pulled the trigger. Any candidate that lacks money and name recognition will not be able to compete and will likely not get the nomination. And there is a reason for this. And I know there's a lot of different hosts that actually brought this up. Correct me if I'm wrong. Cenk Uygur brought it up in the Young Turks. You also had, I believe, Mike Figueredo of the Humanist Report also bringing up this very important point that there are two different candidates that are running in California that we believe are actually going to run for the nomination in 2020. That is of Kamala Harris. And by the way, Kamala Harris is being groomed by the establishment to take on Donald Trump. And LA Mayor Eric Garcetti, who I'm not sure is going to run. And I don't really know a whole lot about. Now, Harris, right now, she does not have a ton of name recognition, but that is beginning to change. Okay. Now, to be fair, though, Harris, at least on one issue, healthcare, has been persuaded to go to the left and actually support Medicare for All and co-sponsor it. That's a good sign. However, make no mistake, Harris is still part of the establishment, and I don't think will likely bring too drastic of change. Now, that doesn't mean that she won't be better than Trump. Obviously, she'd be better than Trump. But again, back to the establishment, steady as we go, business as usual. And that's not what this country, I believe, needs. We need drastic change. So, again, what this means is that you're not going to have any of these upstart candidates. No more people like Bernie Sanders, who actually gained a national platform and leadership positions within the Democratic Party from winning a lot of those smaller states during the primary and actually doing a very, very good showing. In fact, this is the guy who took on the most well-known politician, the most well-backed establishment politician that we've ever seen in the Democratic Party, and was able to make up a gigantic 60-point lead and win somewhere around 46% of all the votes, of all the delegates in this primary. The Democratic Party, they're not interested in seeing anything like that happen again in that kind of near upset. And so California just made a play to try and prevent this from happening. That's what's going on here. And that's why this is a disaster. So progressive groups are going to have to work a hell of a lot harder and a hell of a lot earlier to try and make up for this preemptive strike against progressives. And I think if enough attention is brought to it and enough resources and enough political action is brought to bear that we might actually be able to beat this and beat the establishment. So then we can win and beat the crap out of Republicans. Not literally, but at the ballot box. Okay. One more story here. Changing gears here, we're going to talk about the Kaepernick protest. And something related to it. Okay. A Louisiana high school is now threatening to punish students for not being patriotic enough. Now, this isn't just students, this is student athletes. Now, this is happening in Parkway High School, which is located in northwestern Louisiana, in the Bossier Parish. Now, Bossier Parish, I don't think I said that right, but they overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump in the election, just to show you where they're at politically. Now, the principal, Waylon Bates, has decided to threaten to either suspend or completely cut students off the team who refuse to stand for the national anthem, who actually use their First Amendment rights to take a knee to protest along the lines of Colin Kaepernick. Now, Bates called these demonstrations a, quote, disruption in a letter sent Thursday to both students and parents. In the letter, he says Parkway High School requires student athletes to stand in a respectful manner throughout the national anthem during any sporting event in which their team is participating. Failure to comply will result in a loss of playing time and our participation as directed by the head coach and principal. Continued failure to comply will result in removal from the team. So either stand for the national anthem, don't exercise your First Amendment rights to protest, or get kicked off the team. Forced patriotism, man. How do you like that? I thought this was America. Apparently not. Forcing someone to stand for their national anthem, it's not something that America does or should do. That's something that North Korea does. That's something that every dictatorial regime we say we hate uses. These are the countries that say you must stand for the flag, you must stand for the anthem, on penalty of whatever. In some places, North Korea, for example, penalty of death. And here, at least, the students, the principals, are like, in penalty of you being kicked off the team. You can't go and you can't play sports, you can't enjoy the sport that you dedicate yourself to unless you stand for the anthem. Because if you don't stand for the anthem or respect the flag and all that stuff, well, that triggers me, and I'm a snowflake, and I can't stand any sort of political dissent, so I'm going to remove you from the team. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And look, the thing is, this is America. We have a right to protest, right? And that's what this is about. It's not about the veterans. It's not about respecting the veterans. It's not about respecting the flag. And it never was. So the whole veteran angle is nothing but a red herring that the Republicans, that conservatives threw into this, right? This protest is and always has been about police brutality and systemic racism. It's not about, like I said, the veterans. It's not about the troops either. And it's also not about respect. It's about people of color being murdered in the streets. People like Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, Freddie Gray, and so many others that were killed by police, and there was no consequences in many of these. I mean, look, there's a reason that when people, that people don't demonstrate on behalf of actual criminals. Why? It's because they're usually arrested, tried, and put in prison. The thing is, these people, not criminals, these people were unarmed or, innocent, or they had done something very, very small to provoke a police presence, selling loose cigarettes on the street or not turning on your turn signal. That's not justifiably, that's not It doesn't lead to a justifiable response of violence and death. In the case of Eric Garner, they literally choked him to death for selling loose cigarettes. That's ridiculous, okay? And yet, the police officers, in many of these cases, do not get punished. That's why there are protests. That's why this is happening. It's, again, not about the veterans, not about any of that. In a lot of these cases, you've seen it. These cops keep their job. And look, I'm not saying that police are bad or all police are bad. I'm actually blaming more of the system, right? The system itself is built on a foundation of racism. And not only that, but you've got bad training that emphasizes shoot first, ask questions later. That's why Tamir Rice was gunned down in 2 seconds for having a toy gun. Oh, he looks suspicious. He looks suspicious. Well, he was a young black man playing with a toy gun. That's suspicious enough for them to pull up and murder him in 2 seconds. It's out of control. Out of control. And look, these protests, they're here to highlight the fact that it is out of control, that we actually need some change. And we actually need to do something. But unfortunately, they have been maligned and misattributed to something else in order to distract from their true purpose. And to make sure that the issues that this entire protest is there to highlight do not ever get fixed. And those are the issues, of course, white privilege. I know some people get triggered when I say that, but basically, let me break down what white privilege is real quick. It's having the benefit of the doubt. It's not being pulled over just for the color of your skin. It's not being assumed to be guilty based on the color of your skin. It's the benefit of the doubt. That's the privilege that we have. And we don't realize it's a privilege because we've always had it. But there are people in this country that do not have that privilege. And these are the people that are kneeling during the anthem. Okay? And look, not only that, but you have a justice system that is, again, deeply racist. Where we have a disproportionate number of African Americans, people that are arrested for the same crimes as white people, doing the same thing, that end up getting more jail time, harsher sentences than their white counterparts. That is not normal. That is racism. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people that cannot admit that this country does have a huge problem with race. And this is not a new problem. It is the same old problem that we've had in America for hundreds of years. And unfortunately, it's not going to get better unless you bring attention to it. And these protests are a great way of doing it. And the people that are angry at these protests, and they're saying, well, we got to find another way. This is not the way to protest. This is not the way to protest. Those are the people in which you could never please them with any type of protest. These are the people that say, we just don't want you to protest at all. And this coach is one of them. Okay. That's it. That's all I've got for you today. We're going to go take the weekend. We're going to finish unpacking, getting settled into the new place. And we'll be back for another show on Monday. So we're getting back into the groove of things. I want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure to like and share this stream, the videos that are going to go up later on. Again, thank you to the patrons who support us, patreon.com/TYTNation, who've made this possible. Thank you so very, very much for your support. We love you guys. Thank you. Have an amazing weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Again, and remember, change begins with you. Good night, TYT Nation. We'll see you on Monday.